Shalom Talmudim. Welcome to our third outside the class video lecture, and hopefully this one will be a little shorter, just reviewing some things we already started to practice in class. And I just want to go over the homework since I totally forgot to in the class. This next week we will go over the homework that I gave to you in class, but I wanted to give you the answers to these just in case they might show up on a future quiz or a test. You never know, and it's always good to know how you did. So we have three sentences here, and we'll just go through them together. So there were a couple of vocabulary terms that you needed to have watched last outside lecture, the video lecture 2, in order to get, and holek was one of those. And remember, this being a participle, it's going to show up with different inflections. So it's holek in masculine singular, but it's holaka in feminine. So breaking it down, it's normally ma. We learned our song, Hine ma tov, behold how good it is. So ma can refer to as how, but when it's followed by a verb, it's always going to be an interrogative. And what that means is starting a question. So what is walking is how you would translate this. So ma holek, what is walking or going? You could translate it that way too. Al haderek. So ma holek al haderek, what is walking on the path? What is walking on the path? That's number one. Ma holek al haderek. And pretty straightforward. There's not an answer to that, but it's something, just how you put the sentence together should make sense once you break down the individual parts. Now, number 2 is a little different. You might have been thrown by this because you might say this cow because you have zot hapara. Zot hapara. Now, the key to remember is that in Hebrew you can invert both parts. So you can either say the subject first or the predicate. In other words, you can say ish tov or tov ish. A man is good or good is a man. Now, here's the thing. Whenever the article, and this, don't worry about memorizing this rule. I'm just telling it to you to explain how Hebrew does it, but you're going to just get used to doing it in the right Hebrew order. Normally, just for the sake of practice, it's fine to put all the adjectives after the noun, and that's fine to get in the habit of that, but sometimes they'll be inverted when it's an implied to be sentence. What I mean by that is that if you're trying to say the man is good, it could go either way. You could put good first if you want to emphasize the quality of being good, or you can put the man first if you want to emphasize the identity of the man. But here in this case, number 2, you have zot hapara. So this would be, this is the cow. This is the cow. That's how you would translate it. Now, if you wanted to say this cow is good, you would say ha para hazot tova. Now, notice there's no article on tova. Ha para hazot tova. So not having the article there is what tells you that it's a copulative sentence, or that there's an implied to be verb there. So in this case, the missing article also tells you that you are supposed to translate it as a is verb in there. Okay, now that we're going to see that a lot more as we go. For example, that's typically the structures we've been learning. So ha'ish na'ar, the man is a young lad, or something like that. Okay, number 3, ha'ish tov. Here we have the same kind of sentence again, ha'ish tov, based on what I just told you. This is how we imply a is verb there. So ha'ish tov would be translated, the man is good. And then you have v'ha'isha, so but, you could either translate it but or and, depending on the context. Either is fine here. So ha'isha tov, or sorry, ha'ish tov, v ha'isha yoshevet. Now, yoshevet is another new word from the last time. It's a verb, and that would be is sitting or staying. So the man is good, and the woman is sitting or staying. That's how we would translate this. All right, moving on to the fourth and final sentence here. Aye hamore, which, by the way, I was just reminded again today that more is the word for teacher, but it's also a word that is sometimes used, rarely, but a few places, as archer. So if you want to call me hamore with regard to being an archer, that's fine. I did win a archery contest on my honeymoon in Mexico. Just gonna put that out there as a teaser. All right. So aye hamore is where is the teacher? Again, an implied to be verb there. Aye hamore, where is the teacher? And then I've been using this little dot as a sentence divider, basically. And then, so this is the answer. Hamore al Jesus. Hamore al Jesus. The teacher, implied, is on the horse. Aye hamore, hamore al Jesus. Okay, so hopefully that helps with the translations with regard to those things. And I do want to just reiterate what I said prior with the ha'ish hazeh. If I wanted to say ha'ish hazeh tov, this man is good. If the sentence was ha'isha tova, it would be the woman is good. Ha'isha tova, the woman is good. And of course, you're seeing the agreement there with the comets hey, indicating that those are feminine. Okay, so let us go on to one more item, and that is talking about pronominal suffixes, and we're also going to talk about construct states. We introduced that a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, and then we're going to hit it again at the next class. So here is an example of the pronominal suffix when they are on a word. So I think it's helpful. I've uploaded these charts onto Populi if you want to download them. So for example, the hirik yod, the E is if you wanted to say ma shemi, what is my name? Ma shemi. Well, if you were going to say, where is my horse? You'd say, aye susi. Aye susi. Now, you're familiar with some of these now, but I would encourage you to just, keep quizzing yourself on, how would you say, where is his horse? Where is her horse? Where is our horse? Working through those, putting those on other words. By the way, for just as a refresher, because I know some of you, like me, are prone to forget things, you do have a couple exceptional words. The two main ones are going to be av and ach. Av being the word for father, good, and ach being the word for brother, yes. So you have av in the construct state, and whenever a pronominal suffix is added onto it, it is always going to show up in the form avi. So when you are trying to say, okay, how would you say your father? You would say avicha to a man. Or if you were going to say that to a woman, you would say avik, avik. So you would say your father that way. So there's always going to be that complication with those two words in particular. And we'll get the hang of those words, but normally it's easy to add the suffix on with this typical pattern that we get accustomed to with the noun sus or something like shem for name. Okay, so the thing with the in the type 2, I said we were going to talk about a little more, and essentially the only thing you need to know at this point is that you have type 2 is reserved for plural nouns. So if you wanted to say my horse, you'd say susi. Right here, you'd say susi. But if you wanted to say my horses, you'd say susai. So it's still talking about me as an individual, singular, but it's a plural noun, susai. And then if you wanted to say your horse, you'd say suscha, suscha, suscha. But if you were going to say your horses, it would be susecha, susecha. And somebody noted this, and I think I might have mentioned it a little bit too, is that the reason you always have the yod here is because the plural, if you remember, is susim, susim. So you can't, so in Hebrew at least, I should say, you drop the mem off of the ending and you insert the pronominal suffix, the suffix on the end to communicate what's going on. So that's why you always have this yod here, and the pronunciation would match with that. So susecha, susecha, or in this case, the 2FS is a little strange, but it's a familiar vowel pattern after we get used to it, is susaik, susaik. So it's a diphthong there. And then the 3MS is susav, susav. All right, so that's, you can go through that, read through that. We'll go through that in class a little more as well. But the thing I wanted to introduce now, just for beginning to get your head wrapping around it, is that you typically have these words in Hebrew, the feminine words that end in a kamateh. So maybe you're familiar with the word Torah. Torah is the word for law or teaching. Very common. And whenever something needs to be added on to that word, because open vowels don't really go well together, it's helpful to have a definition on how it ends, something you can hear that. And so the hey at the end of a word will change to a tav. So Torah becomes Torat, and then the suffix is added onto it. So Torah, instead of Torai, it's not that, it's Torati, Torati. So it changes, and you'll get the hang of that. Again, these are patterns we'll learn, we'll practice that. Torah becomes Torati, Torati, and then you go down the list. Toratecha, Toratecha, or Toratech, Torato, Toratach. So you have these different ways of formulating that. And then remember, instead of the masculine plural is im, the feminine plural is ot. And so instead of keeping what we're used to, there's just the ot in here. So it's torotai, or torotecha, or torotaik. So you hear the ot, because that's a common indication of feminine plural. Now we'll practice those things, but it's these, you already know these things. You already know that the plural of para is parot. So you shouldn't be surprised of how all this works, right? In addition, this same rule applies for construct when we are dealing with non-pronominal suffixes. Now, as a reminder, construct is equivalent to a Greek genitive, and it's, in English we do the genitive by having an of between there. So instead of saying Peter's house, we might say the house of Peter. That's technically using a genitive, and so we typically translate that with of, but a lot of languages don't have anything in there. So in Hebrew, instead of saying house of Peter, you'd just say Beit Cephas or Beit Peter. That's the house of Cephas, or the house of Peter. And so that's typically how you formulate that. Now, there are some rules as far as spelling, how that works out. Now, pronunciation, I'll give you the $1 million hint right now, okay? As far as pronunciation, all you need to normally worry about, there are some exceptions to this, but normally we've already begun to see and hear that if you just put two words together, they're naturally understood as being in construct. So for example, Ben is the word for son, And if you say Ben David, it's naturally understood as son of David. Ben David. Mi Ben. Mi Ben. Ben David. Who is a son? Well, the son of David is a son, obviously. So when we think about these things, the spelling differences are more for when you're reading to see the differences. But conceptually, you're going to be able to understand when something's in construct. So the typical pattern of construct is you shorten vowels in order to move the word along. And so the letter B here is a good example of that. Shalom is the word for peace. Makom is the word for place. And when it's in construct, you usually put it into a Shiva instead of a full Kamates, and that speeds it along. So instead of saying shalom, you'd say shalom. It's shalom, 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 shalom. It's just a little bit quicker, and so you'd say like something like Shalom Bethlehem, like the peace of Bethlehem, or Shalom Mashiach, the peace of the Messiah, or Makom Yeshai, the place of Jesse, or something like that. It just flows together, and so spelling-wise, the Masoretes indicate that by shortening some of the vowels. So that's a natural thing that I think we understand since we're working through it vocally, but it's something when we're spelling the words, you'll see that happens. And by the way, when you're doing your own Hebrew sentences and things like that, if you don't get the spelling just right, don't worry about it. The important thing is understanding the words and how they go together. The exact spelling with the Masoretic notations is a later invention. So we'll do the best we can to understand that, but ultimately, you'll get this, and it's just icing on the cake to understand the spelling of these things. So another example of that would be word and heart. Notice how they are, Kamates are long vowels, tsere is a long vowel, and they shorten to Shiva Patak to tell you that they're moving the word along sooner. Same thing with son, ben, with a tsere, that's longer, so it goes to a segol, and that's a little shorter. Okay, so this is a big one. So normally the ending of the word in a plural is im. And so when it's in construct, the mem drops off and it lengthens the end. So Elohim becomes Elohe. So this applies both to construct as well as to pronominal suffix. So if you wanted to say God, you'd say Elohim. If you wanted to say your God to ms, you would say Eloheka, Eloheka. And so your God, or if you wanted to say God of Jacob, you would say Elohe Yaakov, Elohe Yaakov. Or if you wanted to say the sons of David, you'd say B'nai David. Instead of just Banim, which is the words for sons, you would say B'nai David. Okay, so that's a common one to remember. Okay, I think that's good for today, except, I'll do one more thing. So one thing that in Hebrew, so we know the endings, the masculine plural is im, so anashim. If you wanted the plural of a feminine, para or Torah, you would say parot or torot. Those would be the feminine plural of that. There's also one more really important ending, and that's the dual ending. So you run across words like shamayim, that's the word for heavens. It's actually a dual form. And here you have the eyes. The word for eye in Hebrew is a naim in the dual. A naim, you hear the naim. Ayin is the word in the singular, ayin, but in the dual it's a naim. So what does the dual mean? It's just some languages have the ability to say, I'm talking about two of these things, and that's what the dual form is in Hebrew, and we'll talk about that more as we go. All right, so hopefully that gets us started. Make sure to do your homework this week, and we'll talk about that in class.